around like 10, 12 out now.
Sorry,
I hope you are on mute on the other side. Or, yeah, attendees are 8 now.
Okay.
आपका प्रोफाइल देख के तो मैं हिल गया. मतलब आप तो मतलब ESOP में आपके पास ही $1 billion होगा जितना मुझे समझ में आया अभी.
More than that actually.
Seriously?
Yeah, well more than that.
Wow यार. तो यार आप फंड कर रहा हो ना मतलब स्टार्टअप विटअप को हम लोग को फंड करो इसी बहाने. मतलब since you are in a call you said यार okay because of this I want to fund you with $1 billion.
I wish it were that easy.
Huh?
I said I wish it was that easy.
Good यार. So Manish Dukkal and you guys have worked together also, yeah?
Manish took over from me. We recruited him to kind of join us when I was, moving on from InMobi. So after InMobi, I did a startup in the digital health space.
Wow.
That was 13, 14.
Achha. Then, so free charge and then InMobi, is it?
Then, no, so InMobi. So I joined InMobi when we were like, about a dozen people there.
Oh.
We were like very, very young. So 2008 to 2013. And then did my startup, then free charge. And then more recently, a company called Belong. I don't know if you've heard.
Yeah, I know that. Belong.
Matrix and Sequoia founded.
Yeah. How is it doing with Belong?
I think they're facing some headwinds right now. By the way, I mean, I'd gotten your, a very fancy, product of yours. I implemented it there because HR used to roll into me.
Oh, okay. Very good, yeah.
So we used to give that out on the 1-year anniversaries typically. Got it.
So yeah, Belong, I think they were also doing some stuff to get international.
So they've now got at least a handful of people in Singapore, US, UK. So I don't know how they're going, but we've got decent attendance here.
Yeah, sorry. I think we got 18 till now.
Yeah, 19.
Just give me a minute. Shall we start now? Or we take
Sure,
a
why
little?
don't we go ahead and do that?
There's somebody who's kind of great. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Great to have you, Sarat, today for the webinar. We are all working out of home. It's COVID. People are not stepping out. The market, the situations are tense outside. But what's still working right is the stock market. The stock market has kind of continued to show those rises. Stock, as such, is a phenomena which drives crazy for people, more so in the financial sector. Uh, One thing when you think about stocks has been always about where do you earn money? How do you earn money? Is it all bets? Is it all gut feel? Very interesting. And I've been doing some stocks off late, and I realized that that's the fastest and the best way to earn money. This becomes more realistic and more meaningful when you read in newspapers that more than 100 employees of Flipkart became $1 million owner when the company was sold to Walmart. So employee stocks and drive people crazy because it means a lot of money. And I was speaking to Sarat briefly before the call, and he did mention he is $1 billion owner of stocks already. But I think thanks everybody for joining the call. What we would look at speaking in the next 15, 20 minutes is briefly speak about what is employee stock options, why is it interesting. It's interesting for both the founders and people who really start the organization and say what are the resources which we have, and for people who get that, because a lot of times you have a stock or you have a ESOP but you don't know what to do, what not to do about it. With those as a basic thoughts, what I would do is I would like to introduce a most humble, a handsome looking gentleman, Sarat. Sarat, as you know, I think a brief about him. He has more than 2 decades of experience in the financial world, has worked as a CFO for leading organizations like InMobi and the Free Charge. He was among the first person to get SoftBank in India for the first investment. He was a part of the deal where Recharge was sold to Snapdeal for $450 million. He's been a startup guy himself. I understand he did one first startup between his InMobi and Recharge stint. Recently, of the last 3 years, what he's been doing is been helping people like us, more founders, in solving a core problem, which is around employee stock options. With his new firm, Zenequity, at Xoxoday, we have looked at used his services. He's been kind and humble to join the webinar today and help each of us to understand a bit more about employee stocks. What is it? The nuances, the benefits, etc. The flow of the webinar would be what we would love is if there are many questions, because uh, everybody would be dealing with some or other facts. They would be having some employee stock options already in place. They might they might be thinking of. So let's keep more interactive. The more the questions, the better it is for all of us who are attending the webinar. With those as a basic thoughts, Sharat, the first question, foremost question, and I will give an example, is when I started my journey in 2012, uh, every money. So we had put in a pool of money, and we said, what do we do? So the first thing we said is we need office space. Uh, as Marwaris and Banya, you say you don't want to give cash. So we reached out to a friend and we said, can you give me an office space? And he said, okay, fine, you give me an office space, and I will not charge you rent, but this space which would be otherwise costing 15,000 a rental, why don't you give in for 1 year, give in of 1% of equity? I don't know whether it was right, wrong, but today on the hindsight, I feel that I probably could have done a better negotiation out of it. But that's the scenario
Sumit, something just went wrong. You wanna, okay. Maybe you wanna drop off? Well, we can try dropping you off and then coming All right, that worked. That was quite interesting, guys. It was as if we were going through a live, Hindi movie of some sorts from the 80s and the 90s. Thank you, Sumit. It's indeed a pleasure to kind of be a part of this forum. Super excited to share my journey and my learnings, from my journey. I think, so Sumit, long story short, it really depends on what mattered at that particular point in time. It's always possible to kind of look at our decisions and kind of keep re-examining them. But I would say, once you've taken a decision, I think the best thing that we can possibly do is kind of learn to live with it, right? So it doesn't matter whether it was a good decision or a bad decision. It's water under the bridge. It's sunk cost, and that's what a good finance guy will tell you. That once you've taken a decision and there's no opportunity to kind of unwind that decision, reconcile with it, and kind of move on. All right. So I think the decision that you took was a good one. And also it's extremely important that you look at the decisions in their context. So at that time, yes, it proved to be an expensive decision. And I don't know whether, given the similar situation again, if you will take the same decision or not. So there was a monetary value to that decision. Whatever you feel you overpaid, you just assign it to say, hey, that was the cost of the lesson. All right. So we do that and we kind of move on. All right. Yeah. So at no point should you be, chastising yourself to say a decision wasn't good. Right. So
great.
I think value, and then, you assign the rest to another bucket, which is called learnings, and we move on.
Yeah, I think that's the easiest way to say that what do you grow over a period of time is all about experience. And that's where we thought that this session would help people who are there who would want to understand and avoid that mistakes. Sharat, I think what I would suggest is it would be great to set the details about what are the few things from an ESOP standpoint. What should be the outlook of a founder when he thinks about ESOP? What are the basic mistakes which founders could do from an ESOP standpoint? So those could be a good, easy way to start explaining about the entire ESOP thought. And then we could get into more detailing of it. I had requested Sarat to make a few slides and then help others to get that post the presentation. So over to you, Sarat, if you could spend some time explaining that in detail.
Sure. So before we kind of get into the session, so to speak, if you have questions that you believe that we have not adequately addressed, please keep adding them through the chat. It's extremely important that you guys walk away with responses to the primary question that you have in your head. What I've also done is before we kind of get into the questions themselves, I want to take like just maybe 3 or 4 minutes and just walk very quickly through, because I'm sure we have founders across stages, or we have participants who have varying degree of knowledge around ESOPs. So I'll just do a maybe 3 or 4 minute primer on ESOPs, what they are, and then we can perhaps get into your questions and what are some of the best practices, how to kind of think about a few things. Does that sound good? I'm going to just quickly share my screen.
Yeah. So I think people have already started giving questions, Sarat. So, but yeah, you can start, and then I'll come back with these questions as we move.
Awesome. Can you see my screen?
Yes, Sarat, I think.
Right. So, and again, I'm going to quickly run through them, and this deck will be available to you at a later point in time. Priya, who's been kind enough to kind of help us out with setting this up, will be sharing this deck. So any simple question that you have, you'll be able to kind of get them answered. Okay. So very simply, right? And the thesis is, from an employee perspective, if the folks are taking a high amount of risk and they are helping create the future, why not try and own a piece of it? At least that's my personal philosophy. So every organization that I've been a part of, and I've been fortunate enough to be a part of some very interesting ones, I've always tried to kind of own a part of it, because I believe two things, right? A, if you're making the right choice, then time is going to be your friend, right? So any organization that you truly believe in, time will treat it well. And also, when opportunities come and when it's raining gold, you put out, the biggest possible vessel that you can, to kind of collect that gold, right? So I believe early equity is truly like gold. You have to treat it well. And I think that's important for both sides, both, the organization or the founders who are giving this out. So treat it as if it's extremely valuable. And the same holds true for the recipients or the employees. So it's extremely important that both parties kind of come to that agreement. And so I think that's one of the core elements which requires kind of alignment, right? So with that, I'll just quickly move. And this is the approach that I believe founders should take, that there is a long way to kind of build, right? And you can truly create something valuable, right? And they will need team members to kind of help build this. So that's my other thesis, that please be judicious. So I'm not saying give all of it away, but whenever you are giving it, right, recognize the fact that you should be participating, or you should be allowing people to participate, not just in this journey, but also in the wealth that they are kind of creating, right? So with that, let's get into trying to understand ESOPs. So as all of you know, ESOP stands for Employee Stock Option Pool or Program or Plan, right? And what we have to start off with is trying to understand what is a stock. A stock is nothing but part ownership of a company. The numerator is the value of the company, and the denominator is how many shares are there, right? Which is basically the unit of ownership. So in a nutshell, a stock is a unit of ownership, and a stock option is the right of an employee to buy a stock at a predetermined price. So when you are offering stock options to somebody, or when you are receiving stock options, you are being given the right to buy the shares of a company at a predetermined price. If the subsequent value is higher than the price, than this predetermined price, you are in the money, right? And that's when you'll say, okay, you know what, I want to buy this share. If it's lower than that, you will say, you know what, I don't want to buy. So effectively, you'll only exercise this option when you are in the money, which is you're making money. So in a nutshell, it is a bet with no downside. And the bet that you're placing is that this company will do amazingly well, right?
So, Sarat, I think to make it a bit more interactive, and I think some questions which will come in, hope I can bring in now itself. It could help others as well. We hired young people, and young people don't understand the value of this wealth. The long in your previous slide, what is that long? Some of these questions comes very strong because one smart tech talent, he comes and I say that here is 100 stock. He says this is a piece of paper. What exactly should be the thought of founders to explain this? Given that stock today on the stock market, people don't know. So I think very limited understanding is this available.
No, true. So look, Sumit, in a nutshell, we need a broad spectrum of team members, right? So we will have, team members who will be there for a relatively short period of time, and you'll have team members who will truly contribute and be around for the long term, right? I would prefer to invest, and this is again something that the company is kind of parting with, or this is something that the founders are parting with. So you want to give it to somebody who values it. And part of that realization is helping them understand it. So I think not only does the company or the founders need to kind of part with this, I think it's equally their responsibility to ensure that their team members understand employee stock options. And that's where, I'm happy to kind of provide inputs. And I think, this is a great initiative, for example, that, so there are webinars like this one, which help increase the understanding of both employees and founders on what stock options mean. So if somebody approached me, I would actually take the time to explain what a stock option is. How does it work?
Got it.
And I think it's far more important to be to be able to explain what are the upsides and the downsides. So again, not everything works for everybody, right? So even when we go to the stock market, not all stocks are for everybody, right? So for example, as individuals age, our risk profile kind of keeps shifting, right? So stock options are not for everyone, and that's all right.
Got that. Got that. Perfect. I think this is helpful.
Okay. All right. So fundamentally, why are stock options given? The core premise of stock options is that you become a part owner of the company, or you have the path to part ownership of the company, and the employee or the team member gets a significant, economic outcome when the company succeeds, right? And because everybody is now expected to behave like a co-owner, right? It aligns the team to the long-term success of the company, right? So that's really what it is. Now, there are again two philosophies. It could be that, hey, only a small group of very high impact people get stock options, or it could be that everybody in the organization gets stock options. Both philosophies work and they work well, but I think we need to be just very deliberate about how we kind of make it happen, right? But the core premise is that everybody should be aligned to the long-term success of the organization, all right? So we'll just go through some key
please.
terms. Sorry, is there another question, Sumit?
No, go ahead, please. I think we'll park it for later.
Okay. Some key terms: grant, vesting or vesting schedule, cliff, strike price, exercise price, and then exercise. A stock option grant is nothing but like when you join employment, you are given an offer letter, right, or a letter of employment. It basically, reconciles or it formalizes the understanding between the company and the employee. That grant letter is supposed to do the same thing, right? So that's really all there is to it. Vesting period is the period over which, the options vest. What that means is once an option is vested, the person has earned them, right? So there is typically a vesting period, and there are periodic vestings which entitle the person to those options. That's really what it is. An option can only be exercised once it is vested. Cliff is nothing but a period of no vesting, and this is to ensure that there is employee company fit, right? So that is something which protects the company, right? And again, this deck will be available, and you will be able to ask follow-on questions. This is what a typical vesting schedule looks like. This is just an example. Yours could be different. So in this case, the person was given 2,400 options on 1st January 2016. The first 25% will vest on 1st Jan 2017, and then this is the periodic vesting that we were talking about. By 1st Jan 2020, after 4 years from grant, the entire 2,400 options would vest. If the person were to leave anytime in between this, whatever they would have vested, they would have kind of vested by then, is something that they get to keep. For how long? Again, it depends on a bunch of things, but that's really what it is. And regardless of what the value of the stock kind of goes up to, the employee will always be able to buy it at the predetermined price. Strike price or exercise price, these terms are interchangeable, right? And the final step is exercising your options. So as I said earlier, you can only exercise what is vested. And exercising means that you're exercising your right to buy those shares. And then you can get into questions like, how do you exercise? This is typically, some sort of paperwork that needs to be done between the employee and the company. And when should you exercise? Again, fairly open-ended. My recommendation is that, and this is my personal opinion, that you should exercise, close to the liquidity event, unless you can afford to kind of pay taxes. Which brings us to the next questions. Taxes, when do they happen? Taxes are due when you exercise your options and they become shares, right? And the second is when you sell your shares. That's the other point at which you pay taxes, right? So I know that was very, very quick, but hopefully that kind of addresses some of the very, very basic questions that we had.
No, I think, and I think we already have a set of questions, Sarat. One quick question from my end, Sarat, is again coming back to, so when we started, we knew that we you meet people, you understand that you create an ESOP, you say, okay, fine, let's create a ESOP pool. So how do I start thinking of what should be the ESOP pool like? This is
Okay.
a very basic question, and then the generally it's about the number of shares which you have in a company. So if I make a ESOP pool which is only 1,000, then how do you give it? So let's say the ESOP pool is only of 1,000 shares because the total shares in the company is 10,000. If I give 5 shares, people say, what are you do? What the heck are you doing? So how do you I'm sure some of the others who are there on the call might also face it. So is there a way to handle those? Is there a defining rule about what should be your uh, ESOP percentage be generally for the company?
Sure. I think that's a great one, and I think I'm glad we're getting some very very basic, very core questions kind of out there. So how big should it be? And again, I'll give you a consultant-like answer, which is it depends. It depends on several factors, right? A, how many people, what percentage of the population do you want to give it to, right? So again, there are two philosophies. There could be what I personally call the SEAL Team 6 philosophy, which is that, hey, only a very, very small group of people in the company are going to get
Hmm.
ESOPs, right? Or it could be that, hey, I want everybody to behave like a co-owner, so everybody is going to have get stock options. In which case, you'll require a really, really large pool, right?
Hmm.
What I would urge you to kind of consider is ensure that your ESOP plan is actually, you know, it coincides with your organizational philosophy. So if you want to, you want everybody to behave like a co-owner, but they don't have equity ownership, then that's not going to fly, right? Similarly, the opposite also kind of holds true, right? So what you don't want is you want to, create a large pool and then not give it to anybody, because that's really coming out of your pocket as founders, right? So it's important to kind of strike a balance. Extremely important that you do so. And far more importantly, once the pool has been established, that you behave kind of consistently. And over time, things will change. So your plan should, just as well change to reflect that reality. Right?
Got it. Got it. So, Sarat, I think I'll take up a question over here. And I think it's an interesting one. Do founders also be part of ESOP pool, earning equity alongside employees? And I think I also understand this question because you also have times when your founders come in at a later stage. Somebody comes after 1 year. So, what is the way on that? And this would also be able to answer the question about, can a founder also earn a ESOP?
Short answer is yes. So again, I'll
Got it.
break it into two parts.
Sure.
One is, now let's take some very real examples, right? So there are times when not all founders are around for the entire journey,
Yeah.
right? So I believe founder equity should vest as well, right? So now this
Oh,
is an instance where let's theoretically say that all founders are there on the day of incorporation. Everybody got their share, and whatever arrangement was agreed amongst them. But I think founder equity should also vest. Number one. Now this is
got it.
outside of the ESOP. Now let's take the other situation, which is
Mm-hmm.
one of the founders, let's say, joined later,
Mm-hmm.
right? And this person can get ESOPs, absolutely, right?
Okay.
So yes, it's possible. And again, now we are increasingly seeing situations. So for example, I believe one of the senior executives at Zomato just got qualified as co-founder. The same is true, for example, for an InMobi. The same thing happened when Umang Bedi joined Daily Hunt very recently. He's now been
Mm-hmm.
designated as kind of co-founder, right?
Got it.
So yes, it's absolutely possible for founders to get ESOPs as well,
Got it. Got
right?
it. I think another question, and a lot of us dwell with it, is in the journey you need people who can advise. People like you for companies. I would suggest a lot of them to have somebody like you advising them as mentors. And then the whole thought comes: 1 hour of a mentor's time for 10 hours or 20 hours a month is quite expensive, and we look at giving a stock to them. Now, the question is whether you give employee stock or what kind of stocks you offer to your advisors or mentors.
Okay. So again, great question. Now, at least for India incorporated companies, that's not possible, right? So options, employee stock options can be only given to full-time employees. Right?
Correct.
However, because this is a mechanism to compensate the advisors, we can come up with alternate structures which
Mm-hmm.
mimic, stock options, right?
Correct.
So, and these could be in the form of, a success fee, which is, contingent on the company getting to an outcome. It could be in the form of, phantom stock. So there are kind of ways to kind of do it. If the advisor is willing to put in, a small amount of money, then potentially equity can be issued to this advisor and, at a reduced rate. So there are ways to kind of compensate it. And again, a lot depends on the context. A lot depends on which stage you are at.
Yeah.
But short answer is it's absolutely doable. And there are some good, clean ways to kind of make it happen.
Yeah. So it cannot be a ESOP. It can be a phantom stock or
it can be phantom stock. It can be
or
actual shares.
equities.
If, as I said, it depends on a bunch of things, Sumit.
Got that.
But yes,
Got that.
it's possible.
Got it. Got it. A follow-on question from Sanjay itself is, and I think it is important, which is related to taxation, about how so can strike price be decided, say by a merchant banker, and you have an option to give a 30% discount on the strike price. And if you are doing that, what tax implications does it happen? I believe this is tax implication for the employee or for the organization. I think we could cover both of that, Sarat.
Sure. So two things, Sanjay, and I think that's a great question. Your strike price can be determined at this point, and please understand that things change quite substantially based on your jurisdiction. I'm going to assume that you are an India incorporated company. Is that if that's not true, you need to kind of let me know, and I'll kind of tweak my answer accordingly. But in India, you have the flexibility to choose your strike price, right? Most organizations set it equal to the face value of the shares, right? But if you wanted to say give stock options at a 30% discount, that's fine, right? So there is no tax due at that time. Tax, as I said, in the quick slide show that we kind of went through, tax is due at 2 points. The first is when the person exercises, right? So at that point, it will be the prevailing fair market value and the strike price, the difference between those two. And then a second element of tax will be due when the person sells those vested options or now exercised options, which are shares now, at that point. Now, by increasing the strike price, you are potentially lowering the tax rate. However, what you are also doing is you're making this person shell out a fairly high number just to kind of exercise the options. And in some instances, if that number is fairly high, it can become potentially unattractive for an employee to kind of exercise. So I would urge you to kind of keep the strike price relatively low.
Got it. Sarat, a quick question, and this is more from me to you. You start a company and you have a stock or ESOP policy in place. Do you have an option to change it? And what can be the frequency based on the stages of the company? And how do you handle your earlier stock options which have been vested in those cases?
Okay, so short answer is yes, you can change your stock option plan. In fact, organizations should change them, as they kind of grow, because very seldom do organizations seek help in ensuring that the plans kind of scales with the organization, right? So that's kind of number one. And again, a change could be as small as saying that, hey, we need to increase the size of the pool, or market has changed, or our situation has changed, and the plan needs to get revised. So short answer, it can be done.
Okay.
Once you've kind of made the changes, you'll obviously need to kind of get it through, the corporate governance process, which is, board approval and a shareholder approval and all those good things. And then there's kind of a very, simple filing that kind of needs to happen with the ROC and the MCA. But all of those things are good and fine. Sorry, Sumit, you had another part of the question, which I don't think I've answered.
So the thought was, if I am in India company and then I'm moving to the US, how do you
Mhm.
change your stock, or how does it impact your ESOP policy or your documents over there?
See, effectively, Sumit, in that case, it's a brand new policy, right? So you are doing
Yes.
it kind of from scratch, right? So
Got that.
there's kind of no. So again, you can try and mirror the same terms in your new policy, but effectively, one plan was for India, another is for the US.
Got that.
So yeah, it has to be done from scratch, but you can of course make sure that they are similar, or in case you want to kind of do that, right? Now, I just remember the question that you had, which is what happens to your earlier grants
Yeah. So
if you're
earlier
not
ones.
changing in it. So you have a choice there. If the change is not detrimental to the employees,
Okay.
right? The change becomes a lot simpler. If there is a substantial change which is impacting the earlier grants detrimentally, then you will need to kind of figure out a way to kind of seek approval from those guys, from the folks who have the earlier grants,
Got it.
right?
Yeah, Sarath, I think this is it's good that somebody brought in, and Sundar, he says, why not do reserve sort option, RSUs instead of ESOP? Wouldn't it be more attractive to the employee?
Yes, but it's unfortunately not super tax efficient. So for example, an RSU, by the way, for those who don't know, is a restricted stock unit.
Mhm.
And instead of getting the option, you actually get direct ownership. So now we have something of value passing to an employee the moment it vests, and that becomes income in the hand of folks, and therefore tax becomes due at vesting, and that can potentially turn people off because they do not really have the ability to kind of exercise it at that point, right? So the tax rules can make it somewhat inefficient. Also, you do not want everybody to kind of become a shareholder, because again there is a limit on the number of shareholders that you can have. Right now it's 200. So if you're an organization which is kind of scaling, then it can also present a problem, because the moment you cross 200 shareholders, you become a public company. So while you may not be a listed company, you become a public company, which means your administrative overhead becomes quite substantial.
Got it. This is helpful. Sarath, the question over here is, and I think we did cover it. How do you sell your ESOP to a candidate? What are typical candidate seniority expectations for ESOP? I think you will kind of leave it to a founder. I would probably give in a attempt to this answer. So
Go ahead. In fact,
yeah, yeah,
I think founder perspective is far more important.
yeah. I realized that as you start growing, you start understanding the importance of ESOPs a lot more. We've seen senior hires come in and they say that I am okay to leave my salary or forego a percentage of my salary to give or take an ESOP. Now, that is where it starts making meaningful. That is where they believe that they want to be a part of the journey.
Mhm.
And hence, I would recommend that younger employees, say, let's say the first 3 years or 4 years out of college, who've not seen the world, the first job, they might not really love that. But somebody who spent, say, a decade in experience, they would want to prefer that over, say, a 5-10 lakhs rupees a year and they're in the salary. Anything, Sarah, you want to add to it, or we can go to the next question?
No, I think that's a great perspective. I would kind of add just a couple of things, Sumit. So, by the way, that can also serve as a great gauge in terms of the person's risk appetite,
Yeah.
and perhaps an early sign of faith in the organization. So use that as indicators, not absolute determinants, but use them as kind of indicators. The other is, and I think this becomes increasingly important, that as early as possible, as soon as you have sufficient data, I mean, bring in some discipline on ESOP distribution.
Yeah.
Right? Having a framework will typically kind of help you in situations like this. Right? So do try and do that. Most often, I've seen, founders sometimes will part with, too many options too early, and later they just don't have enough left in the pool to kind of give out to other folks. So be disciplined about it as early as you possibly can. Speak to the founder community. Speak to folks like me who kind of do this for a living, and I think you'll kind of come out ahead. I think it's really important that founders learn from each other in a situation like this.
Yeah. And I think when you said to reach to people like you, somebody has actually asked the question, any rough percentage of cost to company for ESOP scheme on a yearly basis, for example? So what's
So
the cost
again,
of managing the entire show of ESOP?
again,
I think,
it really depends on a bunch of factors. But yeah, I mean, there are three components to this, right? So the first is, setting up an ESOP plan. It really depends on your needs, but I think it can be achieved in a fairly cost efficient fashion, right? So don't look at just the cash outflow, look at, what it kind of does for you, right? What I would kind of urge people to kind of do is not take a plan which was prepared for somebody else. Don't pick up a template. Do not do that. It's extremely important that you speak with whoever's kind of advising you. It could be other founders, it could be your CFO, it could be somebody like me, as I said, who does it for a living. But help develop a plan which is built to suit you as an organization or you as founders. Extremely important to kind of do that. Templates are exactly that. They are template. They do not they do not typically absorb what you as an organization kind of stand for, your organizational philosophy, your ethos. So it's important that you kind of develop a plan which is consistent with your value system, with your organizational philosophy.
got it. So the question which I think is helpful also, as BP was saying that, can we split ESOP plan? And is it, as a continued over here, is it when we are almost finishing a pool and need to have a more stock units to offer to the new employee? So I think it's more about addition of new stocks. Is that the way we
No,
look
so
at this question?
it's also possible to kind of do a stock split. So I'll give you a couple of examples. So yes, short answer is when your ESOP pool is getting exhausted, the founders will typically need to go back to the board and say, hey, we want to expand our ESOP pool. And with some agreement amongst the founders and investors, the pool can be kind of expanded, right? That's number one. Number two, a stock split is something else, right? So very often we'll see that the value per share has gone up quite substantially. So very often you'll see values which are per share, which are, I don't know, 2 lakh, 3 lakh, 5 lakh rupees a share, right? Now, let's say it's 5 lakh rupees a share. Now, if somebody needs to be given options worth, let's say 2 lakhs,
okay,
you can't give somebody 0.4 stock units, right?
Right.
So what ends up happening is, and let's say, your face value at this point is, let's say 10 rupees, you are able to do a 1:10 stock split where your value per share goes down from
5 lakh to
5 lakhs to 50,000.
1 lakh.
Right?
Got that.
So in this case, now you can, relatively easily give options to somebody who wants. So instead of getting, 0.4 units, this person will now get 4 units, right? Which is meaningful. But that also brings out an interesting point, right? So somebody is saying that, hey, I've only received kind of 4 units. I mean, that's nothing. It's very important that you also communicate the monetary value of that amount of those units, right? It's extremely important that the two kind of speak to each other. So just value is not great. Just units is not great. You have to kind of do a cohesive job of communicating value of both of those.
Which brings into a question, and I think the value, when you speak, value is in the current avatar, the value gets increased in a fast fashion. It gets eroded in a very fast manner. Pre-COVID might have got a stock valued at say like a lakh rupees per stock, and after a COVID, somebody in travel might have gone to a 20,000 rupees. So how do you handle that when you put in a value? Because the employee might come back saying that this is what you had told me when you were giving me that as a stock value. And can you write that because you're not making a merchant banker, or you do a valuation before you define it?
Look, again, this is a little subjective. So especially around the current situation, and anytime there is a crisis, there's a little bit of an unknown, right? Or in this case, there's a lot of unknown. We don't know when things will open up. We don't know when something will kind of get back to normal. In a situation like this, look, if it's a short-term bump, right? So, for example, for the first month or two of the entire world, things were kind of just down.
Yeah.
And now things, in some cases, for example, education, everything's kind of actually, seriously up. There are certain things which are, back to normal, and there are certain things that are still kind of depressed, right? But they have line of sight to, let's say, better visibility. A great example I was just reading about Uber yesterday. Their, I think, rides business is down 30%, but it's more than made up for their delivery business.
Oh.
Right. So the point I'm trying to make is, if you believe that this depression is temporary, right, then I don't think anything significant needs to be done.
Got it.
But if you believe that this is a long-term this thing, and now the value is kind of depressed for a relatively longer period of time, then maybe the company can consider giving some additional equity to employees to kind of make up for that gap.
So, sir, I was trying to understand that,
right?
Is that something which can be challenged in the court? Let's say if you put in a value to it, I'm coming from the employee side, saying that I had given you a stock, or let's say 100 stock worth 30 lakh rupees. And then there's the market, which is kind of reacted. So can that be something which the employee can take to the court, saying, I was told 30 lakh, today when it's vesting, it's only 5 lakh. Or today when I'm able to exercise, I'm only getting 5 lakh out of it. So you made a fraud.
Not really, Sumit. So again, depends on the context. A lot depends on the context. But as we all know, that stock prices can move up or down, and that's true for private companies. It's also true for public companies. Right. So I've invested a ton of money in a bunch of companies which haven't done well. Right. However, if the delta in price is because of something which is not right, information was hidden, etc., then I think it's a different situation. But if it's just market forces, nobody could have foreseen COVID, right? And if because of that, the value of somebody's stock options came down, I don't think the company or the founders can be held accountable for it, right? So I don't think. That said, I'm not a lawyer, so I want to make that amply clear. But yeah, so long as there is no malfeasance, I think everything is above board. See, at any given point in time, what we have is what's available today. We have an aspiration for a higher number later, or in due course. Not all of our dreams come true, right? So it's just as simple as that. It's at best.
So I think we are getting a lot of questions. So hopefully, I'm getting a lot of questions. I think there's a lot of founders who are really wanting to understand, get maximum out of it.
Sure.
Hopefully you're not getting tired because of it.
No, not at all.
So a good question, and I think this might be important for just not the employees, but also would be important for people who get it. The question is, if an employee quits, what to do with the vested stocks, as they don't want to exercise to avoid advanced tax implications. So how to carry them forward? And I think something which I'm able to relate to, a good candidate spent some 4 or 5 years with us. And when he was quitting, we obviously, in the old ESOP policy, we had that. And I said, you have an option either to take it or to leave it, before we kind of met you and kind of got some good suggestions. So yeah, I think that's a fair question. What happens if your current policy has that you have to vest it before you quit? You have to either exercise it, which means let's say I pay 1,000 rupees per share and say pay 30% taxes to it. And tomorrow, I don't know what will I earn out of it.
If you remember, I've kind of touched on this. I would, exercise only as close to liquidity.
Liquidity, yeah, you did mention that.
And I think it's increasingly important. Look, this is a market which is still relatively young, right? So there isn't a whole lot of liquidity available. Things are improving, absolutely.
Yeah.
What I would urge founders to kind of do is extend that period as long as they possibly can. We are looking at some very interesting frameworks which are based on, sometimes, the impact that this person's had, the tenure that this person has kind of spent with the organization. So we are coming up with some very interesting frameworks to kind of make that happen. The one advice that I do have for all founders is, keep a lot of flexibility in your plan, right? So you do not know what situation. So the more rigid a plan is, right? By nature, as startups, we are supposed to be kind of flexible. We are supposed to be nimble. We are supposed to, respond. This is exactly one of those situations. So please, A, craft your plan to, uh, which is aligned to your organizational philosophy, your organizational ethos. The second is ensure that the plan has enough flexibility in it. You should be able to vary terms. You should be able to vary, vesting schedules, exercise periods, etc. Do have the flexibility to kind of do that. So, which is why I said, don't pick up a template. Craft a plan which understands you as a company and you as founders.
Got it. And I think important point which I realize is every time we have gone to a discussion on fundraise, speak to investors, one thing which good investors seek is, do you have an employee stock policy? So I think important point to all founders out here is, this is again an important thing, because that puts a point that, are you really concerned about your employees? Do you want to have people who would shoulder the responsibility? Because it's not always the founders who will run the business. So planning a ESOP or running a ESOP scheme is something which is a good option for each of us to use. A question over here, Sharat, which is, can a company create and give ESOP rights after its formation when no merchant banker has been involved yet? I think you did cover that, but you could
Yes,
cover it.
yes, we can. Short answer is yes, we can. You absolutely can, and you should.
And the follow up on that is, or does it need to be done after the company has been valued formally?
Not at
How
all.
is this?
Not at all.
Got it. And
So
yeah, go ahead.
here's what I believe is the optimal kind of journey. When founders come together, they form a company. I believe the next step you should do is create an ESOP plan before you have a business. I would say get it out of the way early. Super important, right? It not only tells. Very often we'll come across instances that hey, we formed this company. We in fact raised our round, but we've had employees from the very early days who we promised ESOPs to, but we've not been able to do it because we don't have an ESOP plan yet, right? Do not make that mistake. And again, these early believers are supremely important, right? They took a risk when nobody else was kind of willing to. They believe in you, but trust me, with every passing week, every passing month that they have not received what you had kind of committed to them, that your faith or your credibility is getting eroded little by little. So please try and address it. Please try and fix it as soon as you possibly can.
I think this is another new point, and I think it's important. It's recommended that we need to have a trust for ESOP holdings. Is it mandatory, or can we keep it a part of a cap table itself? I think it's the trust as a thought and voice required. It can be good if you can throw some light, Sharat.
Sure, and I think that's a great question. So first, trusts are not required. Now they become necessary when things kind of are complicated. There were some somewhat complex transactions early, which necessitate that a trust be formed. But the optimal situation is that you just kind of create an ESOP pool, you reflect it on your cap table, and you do not need a trust. So if you need a trust, then there is a severe amount of administrative overhead, which means that you need to first create a trust, which means so there is documentation and expense associated with that. And then you need a trustee, which again cannot be one of you. I mean, one of the founders. Typically, it needs to be a third party. Third, this is a legal entity, so it needs to be you need to have its accounting done, and you need to have its audit done every year. So it little by little, it's it compounds the administrative overhead and the expense. So I would say unless absolutely required, do not do a trust. You absolutely don't need it unless, as I said, there are certain situations which require one for you to kind of clean up. If you had set up your ESOP plan relatively early, you will not need a trust.
Brings me to a question, Sarat, and this is more on my CS. And when you do your audit, you already have your OPEX and kind of a negative EBITDA, and then you want to say that this becomes another expense you have to book at the time when you've planned, or at least when you're given, build up the stock option. So some thoughts on how does it impact the books of the company when they are creating this ESOP pool? A small understanding might help about how do you put it in terms of your balance sheet, and how do you put it in terms of your P&L?
Okay. So the very simple way to think about it, Sumit, is, when you are giving somebody a grant, right, it's fundamentally another form of compensation.
Yeah.
Right? Except that in this case, you're going to compensate this person with equity, subject to a small payment, right, which is your exercise price or your strike price. Because this is an expense, it needs to flow through your P&L, right? And again, there are two ways to kind of do it. Well, it's straight line, and the other is graded vesting.
Mm-hmm.
But net, it's an accurate expense, so you should do it, right? I understand that you want to keep it at a minimum. There are, again, good, solid methodologies to kind of ensure that you are not overbooking the expense. So please do it at that point. But we enable organizations to kind of optimize this expense also from a P&L perspective. In fact, just over the last week, we've helped, because as a lot of audit closures are kind of happening these days, a lot of folks have been reaching out trying to optimize these things, and we help organizations do that as well.
Got that. I think just a question on that. So is it that you do it at the time of vesting, as soon or at the time? So primarily on the vesting, the number of shares which have been vested, you have to put it in your P&L.
Well, yeah, I mean, in a very at a very high level, yes, you're right. Right. So yes.
Got it. Sharat, we're almost towards the end of it, and I think last 5 minutes. So I think it's been a kind of fruitful session. You brought in a lot of depth of knowledge. I think it was a learning session for me. I already taken multiple sessions from you earlier. I really appreciate that of what you do. As a closing remark, I think I want to just re-emphasize some points which you mentioned. ESOP is one of the most important and most valuable things as founders we have. I think the sooner we realize it, and the sooner you start using it to your advantage, it's really helpful. The second is this does have an implication from a taxation standpoint, from implications from a management standpoint, which is where a player like you, and I think again thanking you for what you have been doing for us and multiple other companies. What your organization brings to the table is reducing that headache, bringing in a lot of visibility and transparency, and which is helping founders to start using this weapon to their advantage, just not for founders, but also for employees who are getting it. So with those as a remark from my end, some closing remark from you, Sharat, and then we can kind of close the session.
Awesome. Thank you, Sumit. And thank you, Priya, for making this happen. Very, very quickly, I'll just kind of summarize, what I believe are, good things or good practices. Create a plan which is, a reflection of your organizational philosophy, your organizational ethos. Do not pick up a template. Be employee friendly. I think it always kind of pays out in the long term. Third, communicate with your team. Ensure that I think it's the responsibility of the founders to ensure that your team understands what they are getting. If they do not understand it, they will not value it. Speak both in terms of value and the number of units, right? And ensure that your plan is flexible so that it can evolve, with you as as your organization evolves, right? So you should have that flexibility kind of built in. And finally, I think ESOPs or equity related compensation is one of the most powerful instruments there is, right? It can be used for attracting folks, it can be used for rewarding folks, it can be used for retaining folks. And if you're not doing that well, I think you're leaving a lot of value on the table. So please do not leave that value on the table.
That's great. Thanks so much, Sharat, for this. I think really a helpful session. Thanks everybody who has come in and attended this. Appreciate your time, and do get in touch with Priya, who would send across all the details. Thanks, Priya, for arranging this and having all people over here. Thanks once again, Sharat. Take care. Bye.
Thank you, guys. You've been great. Thanks.